will officially get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. So my name is Pam Schwartz. I'm the Executive Director here of the History Center, and I have with me today Jeremy Heilman, who's our Orlando Registrar, but is going to be moving into the position of Assistant Curator in our Collections Department here in a week or so. This is going to be hard because I move around a lot, so I'm going to have to remember to stay put. So we're excited to have Jeremy here. We'll be kind of kicking back and forth here on the presentation. I see a few familiar faces in the room, people who we've had come to programs before. There's probably a few familiar faces online as well. So again, thank you everybody so much for joining us. Has anybody here, and I won't be able to pull the audience, but audience, please make sure you're putting questions in the chat. Katie can kind of relay some of that information, but just want to see, has anybody been to one of our Pulse-related lunch and learns in the past? Okay, I thought so. Has anybody actually visited any of our Pulse exhibitions that we've done in the past 5 or 6 years? A few, good, great. Well, so something that's a little bit different for the History Center this year is that we're not doing a full exhibition for the 6-year remembrance. We have done 6 exhibitions so far. One that where we actually talked about Pulse in a LGBTQ history exhibition that we had, and also 5 remembrances. So we've done several exhibitions. We chose not to do one this year for a variety of reasons, but it was a very challenging conversation and decision to make. What we are doing, though, is we will still be open free on the weekend of the remembrance. So the 10th, 11th, and 12th will be open free. And we will have the white Pulse Memorial crosses here on display for people to view. Those are an item that really sort of exists in a lot of people's memories and vision and hearts from that time period. And so we wanted to be able to do that at least. And in the future, we will, look at doing exhibitions again, but having a few years of space here to continue to work on and cultivate the collection, build it. And so that kind of leads me to the conversation here today. What's changed? We've done a few of these lunch and learns. We've done several exhibitions. So what more can there possibly be? There's a lot more. The experience around Pulse is that everybody who came through this or was somehow impacted, no matter how tangentially or how directly, are survivors of an event, right? You've got survivors who were there. You've got families who have survived the loss of a loved one. You have first responders who survived. You've got community members who have come through and been ultimately changed or impacted by this event. That's an ongoing story. You're a survivor for the rest of your life into perpetuity from an event like this. And every event that happens every day somehow impacts you, and it impacts your history. It impacts how you view and feel or think about the things that have happened to you before. I would want to take a minute to recognize all of the events and unfortunate tragedies that we've been having between Uvalde and Buffalo and in Iowa and Ames and in Tulsa, because those, of course, hit home here in Orlando a little bit differently than they may have previously. So I want to recognize all of the people who are grieving after those events. And I also want to recognize that this is a really challenging topic. So if anybody in the room needs to take a minute or step out, please do so. That's okay, and you can come back in when and if you feel comfortable. We don't have anything that is particularly upsetting or graphic in this presentation, but we just do want to give you warning that we recognize that it is a challenging topic. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. But again, we're going to try to talk about what we've learned while we've worked on the Pulse project, what we're still learning, and we're also going to highlight a few new objects as well. So I won't talk much about the history. I'm sure, I would assume, I should not assume, but that most people in the room or viewing virtually are familiar with this event, right? That's probably what piqued your interest in coming to this program. But June 12th, 2016, last call, 2 a.m., a perpetrator entered a nightclub on South Orange Avenue, and 49 individuals were killed. Countless others, 68 or so, were injured, and countless others became survivors of living with this for the rest of their lives. First responders were responding. The police were doing what they needed to be doing, and the families were grieving. And we, as an institution, thought about what role do we play for our community. What do we do and what can we provide? And so that same day, we sort of started by crafting a 5-page collecting plan after this event. We knew that this was going to be a huge event in our history. We didn't know what it meant. We didn't understand it. We didn't have all the facts. We just knew that it was going to have a lasting impact and that many of our local residents were going to be in some way touched by this event. And so we started a 5-page plan. It was a really ugly plan to start. It went over through a lot of refinement. But within a week or two, we became the sort of repository of material memory for Pulse. We took on that collecting, and again, we had no idea what that would ultimately mean for us across time. But that collection is now known as the One Orlando Collection Initiative. It is ongoing, still 6 years later. It has over some 12,000 plus objects, thousands of and terabytes of photography and video related to this somehow. Some of those memories and photos are from before the shooting happened, but related to the site or to the people. Some of it is the event itself, and some of that is also the love and support that came from the community, investigations, and all sorts of the things that have happened that lead us up to today. So it has oral histories, it has photographs, video, digital archives as well. So it's a lot of different things included in this collection. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. You'll probably recognize this site if you were here at the time. Part of our plan was simply keeping an eye on the news and trying to figure out what stories there were going to be to tell. So one of the biggest ways, the largest I would say amount of things in our collection are from those spontaneous and temporary memorials that popped up throughout the community. We worked with the different site and landowners. We worked with the community to build awareness around the fact that we wanted to be able to preserve this event. What happens at a memorial? What happens to those objects? Has anybody, when they put an item at a memorial, thought about that? What's going to be the ultimate end to this? I don't think a lot of people do think about that. They leave it. The thing for them is this idea of replacing the loss by giving, right? So putting something else there. We didn't want all of that heartfelt emotion and all of the love and support that came after to just go away, be put in a trash can, to be incinerated, whatever it would be. And so we really did collect. You'll see the bottom right corner photograph is our impromptu collecting kit. There was no manual on how to do this. You know, no city thinks about, well, what happens if a giant memorial comes up? How's it going to get taken care of? Who's going to deal with the dying flowers and the spilt candle wax and things starting on fire from those candles and all of these items? And so we stepped in to help, and we just did the best that we could. But we collected for 31 or 32 days straight at the different sites getting things. We also collected much further. So Jeremy will be sharing some international examples of the response to this event, things that have come 3, 4, 5, and 6 years later. Not all of the collecting was done immediately. Just one spotlight item is actually a lei. You'll see that it's sort of draped on the Orlando Health sign. Orlando Health was one of the memorial spaces. And I won't talk at great length about this, except for that many people in Hawaii came together to create this lei, and they had shells with each of the victims' names. I believe it was 49 feet, and they brought 3 of these, and they gave them to different sites, and one of them was at Orlando Health. And we actually preserved this one because it wasn't on the ground. The others were on the ground, and if you know anything about June and July in Florida, it is very wet and hot, and there are so many bugs. And so it actually took us about a year to conserve this lei. We talked to a lot of, there's an actual name for it, and I can't come up with it, places that do things with plants, botany, different places on how to preserve this, and didn't have a lot of direct answers. But we ended up creating a custom-built exhibitions case for that item, and it even has climate control inside of it to help regulate humidity. This item will not last forever, ever. It's organic material, but I believe we are the first site. Many sites have received this, unfortunately, but we were the first site to try to figure out how to actually preserve it, and in really difficult conditions given the wet atmosphere that we have here. So you'll see also how we displayed it at one of the featured exhibitions that we did.
So yeah, we're going to volley back and forth here a little bit, so hopefully that's not too distracting. But yeah, so this is an example of an item, sort of how Pam was talking about the lei, where special care and attention is given to the item because it's so unique. Here at the History Center, my role is dealing with the artifacts related to the One Orlando collection and sort of both the, the cataloging and usage, and then also the physical upkeep of such items. So one example of the type of item that requires a different kind of care and a different kind of consideration, both in terms of the physical upkeep and the sort of usage, is this collection of crosses. So these white crosses were created, as Pam kind of alluded to earlier, by a carpenter from Illinois named Greg Zanis, who became known for bringing such crosses to sites of tragedy, throughout the country. And unfortunately, he made them for several notable, tragic events. But he came and brought the 49 white crosses to Lake Beauty on the campus of the Orlando Regional Medical Center. And people really kind of took to these in a way just because it was sort of one of the first kind of public sites where you could pay respect to the individual and not just the, the tragic event. So people started leaving items, either they would make things that they would make an individual one for all 49 people, or they would make things that were specific or special to that individual. So some things are represented for all, some things were made special by, family or friends of that specific individual. And when these items were collected for posterity, both the cross were saved and put into these special boxes to make sure that they're preserved for posterity, but then also the items were placed in a box for that individual. And I say that because it's just an example of a sort of way that differs a little bit from the norm of what we do. So generally speaking, like items go together in storage areas. So if you had, a collection of pencils or keychains or baseball cards or whatever the case may be, they would be stored in a way that they could, be together and that they could properly be in that space together. Whereas some collections that come in, they would be broken up. So if you had, for example, say pencils, you would have a pencil from some donation and then another one, and they're all stored together because that's just the safest way to store them in a box. With these, we decided, or the decision was made, this was prior to my working with the collection, to actually keep all of those items together. And the reason is so that if anyone wants to, either for research purposes or if this is one of their loved ones, wants to see all of the items that were with the cross, they can do so easily, and we can pull that out for them and do that rather than retrieving like 80 items from different spots in storage. And I think that's like just one of the examples where you have to kind of consider both the physical upkeep and what it means to people, what the object is, and its best usage in practice. So I think that's just an example of sort of the care that makes this collection a little bit unique as compared to other, collecting efforts. So. And then another thing that's really an important part of the One Orlando collection is the digital end of it. So there are so many things that, kind of go into this. A lot of it is the photography and the, digital photos that exist out there, both of the club and the sort of culture that existed there prior to the shooting, and then also, just photos from memorials, photos from events, all those kind of things. But one thing that I don't think that everybody considers is sort of the social media end of this, and the sort of the life that takes on, and how it's both a research tool to sort of see what was happening in real time, and also a tool for collecting in terms of us just knowing what's out there and available. So if, say, somebody created artwork or there was an event in a different area of the country, that's something that we're able to sort of keep track of a little bit better through the use of social media. And I know that this is a big part of the ongoing efforts as well, just because people have these photos or have these items that are digital that need to be kind of kept within our collection in terms of the updated technology. So you run into situations where people have a hard drive or a memory stick full of just digital photos, and our sort of goal is to get those, maintain those, and keep up with that technology so that it's not lost to time in the way that, say you save photos on a CD or a floppy disk, and those become more obsolete as the technology evolves. The digital preservation end of it is, very important and provides something additional to the physical artifacts that we maintain here in the collection. So I'll pass it back to Pam for a moment here.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that museums collect. Again, we started in those temporary memorial spaces. The digital collecting was really interesting because if you think about an event that happened 20 years ago, 9/11, Oklahoma City, even longer, there was not the digital presence. You would have never seen a Facebook post that said, "Get out of Pulse and keep running," that then had within a week 5,000 some comments on it, right? So it's sort of a different thing, and there's so much of it worldwide. Like, we will never be able to preserve all of the response to Pulse Online, nor should we, because there's only so much you can do with that. But it's just a really important aspect. That's something different at this point. This is the most sensitive photo, I would say, that we have in this presentation, just so you know. The memorials, talking with people, talking with artists, getting the national response and the global response. This was a more challenging side of this collecting. This was all very hard work to do. Being in the memorials, reading every heartfelt expression of grief was really hard on the staff to absorb. Eventually, we did sort of stop reading a lot of those, and we just said, let's preserve it and we'll figure it out later. It almost felt disrespectful not to read them. And to take as we were taking them in. But another thing that we did do was actually collect from inside of the club. When I say that, it's not what you're thinking. This is after this has been released as a crime scene. This is after Biohazard has gone in and done what they do in cleaning up sites. But often sites of tragedy become sites of arson, sites of breaking in for things like dark tourism and photography. And so a lot of times things can get damaged. You never know what's going to happen to the building. Is it going to become a memorial space? Is it going to be demolished? We wanted to be able to preserve not only parts of the actual event, but also parts of the club that would have had sort of a visible space or a memory for people that weren't touched by the event, right? Something they could remember from the happy days at the club, not just this event. And so we worked with the club owner. We didn't know, the chances of most of the things coming out of this building of ever actually being exhibited or displayed, very minimal. They may never go on display. But think of how real things, actual objects, make history for you. Seeing Abraham Lincoln's hat is different than just reading about what happened, right? Not that that's necessarily the best comparison, but it's just that, that's why museums exist, is to preserve that history and to show you the actual remnants of that history. So we did collect inside the club. This is a photograph of our former collections manager and myself. Actually taking a low-grade adhesive and trying to preserve this door. We spent about 2.5 hours preserving it because there was not a lot left in the club to actually collect, but we have things like, if you had ever been to Pulse, the beaded curtains that you would walk through, which showed no sign or evidence of the event itself, but it's something that people be like, oh my gosh, I remember those curtains, right? And that's linked to a happier memory of their experience at Pulse than, say, this door that is covered in bullet holes. Important to preserve all pieces and aspects of the history. Again, these may never be exhibited. Some of them may not have a lot of research value, but they certainly have testimony, and they bear witness to the event that happened. So we have a variety of things from in there, but again, they are items that may or may not ever be shown, but was very important for us to collect. Another aspect is not just the stuff. We've been talking about the stuff, the crosses, the memorial items. The stories are very, very important. Oral history is something that our museum does. We probably have one of the largest oral history collections in a museum in the nation. Not the largest, but one of them. Oral history is something that is actually leaned more into academia, but academic oral history actually happens a lot differently than what we do here. So we started doing oral histories. The first oral history, I'd only been working at the museum here for 4 months. I'd moved here in February, started my job here. 4 or 5 months later, Pulse happens. I didn't even know where our audio recorders were kept. Honestly, I did our first Pulse oral history on my cell phone because it was the equipment that I had. And it was with one of the families who were visiting from another state. They were here to clean out their daughter's apartment. And they came and they asked if they came on late on a Friday and they said, we cannot go to the sites. We don't want to continue to share our grieving with the world, but we thought maybe we could come here. We understand you have the crosses. Could we see it? our main collections facility is 30 to 40 minutes away. And so I said, well, how long are you in town? And they said, we're leaving tomorrow. So we went that night, we gathered things, we met them the next morning, and we're able to give them a private audience with their daughter's cross. And anything that we could, we hadn't cataloged anything at this point. This was only a month in. We were still really actively collecting. And we were able to provide them just a quiet, safe space as a family here to be with those objects. And I said, would you be interested in doing an oral history? I know this is all very, raw. It's recent. You can please feel free to say no, but we want people to remember your daughter. We want people to know who your daughter was. And that's a lot more than this event that happened. And so they were willing to talk with me. And that's sort of how the oral history collection started. But what we do is a biographical oral history. We don't just talk to you about one event. If you were at a basketball game at the arena and we're interested in talking about that, we're not just going to ask you about that. We want to know about your whole life and how you came to be at an event, or what in your life led you to the places. How did you even come to live in Central Florida or be here, etc. So what we have found is that our oral histories actually go much outside of just one event. We learn a lot, and we're going to kind of come back to that in a moment. But we did a broad spectrum. We've done over 225 oral histories, which is an extraordinary amount of oral histories around an event. We were really fortunate. You can see these beautiful artworks. A lot of times people will just do audio for oral history. Sometimes they'll do video. We know that when people are in a trauma moment, when people are emotional, it's not always easy to be on camera. Like, your nose is running, you're crying. It's like, what do I do with my face? So we made a intentional decision early on to not do video. We wanted people to feel like the recorder wasn't there. We wanted people just to feel like they were having a conversation with me or with Dan or with one of our other staff. But we actually met Tom, who happens to be here today. And Tom is a local artist who does urban sketching live at events. And he was really interested in documenting this event and the people impacted by it. And so we started working together, and wherein I or another staff would do an oral history, and he would sit in and actually sketch it. And people just forget, as you already have, forget that he's in the corner. He's very quiet. But you'll see what we ended up with were these beautiful watercolor artworks of these events. And like the one in the lower corner is with Corey Cannell's family. We met them at 10:30, 11 o'clock on a Friday night over pizza at their house, because that's when and where they were comfortable. And that was a really important thing about doing oral history around this event, was meeting people where they were at. We have oral histories that we've rescheduled 14 times because they just weren't ready. And that's okay. We've really continued. We have some people who we're just now doing oral histories with because they're just now ready. So it's an ongoing thing, and people's stories also change. We do an oral history with a family at 1 month. Don't you think it's probably good to talk to them 5 years later and see what's changed? What is the historical, the impact of this event and their loss, et cetera, on them and their trajectory through their ongoing experience, right? So we're really fortunate to have these beautiful portraits. Tom has also done a lot of different events like this one today. You'll be able to see his artwork at the end. I believe it's the largest documentary of a single event by the same artist. There's over 350 to 400 artworks in the collection of all the events and the vigils and the memorials. So that's really beautiful. We featured that in exhibitions before, but it's something that's really unique to our oral histories. It was a different thing than just having a photo of somebody sitting in my office or a video of it. I don't know how to go back, but the picture that was in the upper right-hand corner, we actually, they did a pop-up event at a tattoo shop where they would give free tattoos for anybody who was a survivor, first responder. We said, hey, would it be too invasive if we just came and just let people know what we do and just talk to them? And they're like, well, if people are willing to talk to you, sure. So we just went, we got to meet first responders and survivors, and we got to meet two people actually getting tattoos together. One was a survivor and one was the dispatcher he talked to on the phone. Or the 911, maybe I'm not using the right term, but meet them and say, what does it mean to you to be getting tattoos together? And they're very close now. And so we got to document that, and that was a first responder. You see the tattoo they were doing on his chest. And so it was just a really unique experience to be able to record that, like in the moment of them getting these tattoos that were specifically about this journey that they'd been through. One oral history, I should speed it up because I could talk forever about this stuff. Just sharing how we use oral history. Right? So after we record an interview, then what? Does anybody ever listen to it again? You know, if you've been to our exhibitions, which a few of you've had, you've seen we do them in a lot of different ways. There may be a quote on the wall. You may be able to touch a button and listen, but we use them in a lot of different ways. And history and people are fleeting, right? Every day, some of history is now history. It's past, and we're losing people all of the time. There are a few survivors and first responders who were impacted by this event we never had the opportunity to speak with, who already passed away. We'll never know their story or their side or their experience. One example I'll share is Roberta Blick. We met Roberta Blick through another woman, Nancy Rosado, who was a first responder not only at 9/11 but also here, a very important person locally. And Roberta went to her church, and Roberta had a gay son and had been a gun activist her whole life and against guns. And she wanted to do something after Pulse. And so she chose to make this quilt. And the idea behind the quilt was that you could see all their faces. What would be the impact if you could see what 49 actually meant? And so we went to Roberta's apartment, her home. She's sitting there in her chair with a quilt on her lap. And I'm going to just play you a little excerpt. You'll hear at the end, listen for Tom's name. She fancied herself an artist, and so she actually starts, instead of talking to me or just talking, she just starts talking to him at the end. But see if we can make this technology work.
Can you imagine the impact? Can you imagine the impact it would be if you walked into a room and you had these 49 faces, plus all of the Sandy Hook babies, plus the ones that were at the theater that night, plus all the other gun-toting places we have had, and the people that have been killed. Can you imagine the impact it would have in that room when people walked into that room and saw all those eyes looking at them, saying, what did you do to make them stop doing this to us? It would say something to somebody, surely. Surely, eventually, I won't be here. I'll be gone. But surely other people will be here to say, don't do this to our babies. Don't do this to our babies. We just can't have them do this to them. Can we, Tom? Tom says, Nancy says, no. Just got to do
This quote was
something.
traveled around the nation. It's signed by Barack Obama, Jennifer Lopez, Lin-Manuel Miranda. Was taken all over and signed and then brought and donated to us. And Roberta Blick died about 2 months after this. She was terminally ill with cancer. And we were so fortunate to get to meet her and to be able to collect this and let her know that this is something that would be here preserved with her actual voice. We did show it in a couple of our exhibitions, but here's an example of how the whole package of history comes together. It's not just one thing, it's many things. It's a quote from Roberta. It's a story, a summary of what happened. It's the quilt itself. It's the watercolor artwork that features her taking the time, not only taking the time to make this quilt, but also taking the time to share it with us and allow us to preserve her moment and the role that she, as a community member here, somebody with a gay son, felt and wanted that she felt like she could play and wanted to play. One of the, I'm going to let you talk about this. Sure. I think it's your turn.
Yeah. So, you know, in having this collection of oral histories, it allows us the opportunity to utilize them in many different ways. In our 5-year remembrance exhibit, we were able to utilize a collection of oral histories with family members of the victims. So it was one of the situations where we were discussing our interactives here at the History Center for the exhibit and decided that we wanted to utilize the oral history clips and then also the artwork from Tom. And then we wanted to do it in a way where, you know, clearly there's so much of this featured in the exhibit that harks back to the tragedy and the event and the response to the event. What we wanted to do was to pull some of the clips with the individuals' families that talked about them more as a person or more about their relationship with the person being interviewed in a way that, you know, we could show them for the person they were in their life and not just discuss, their final hours or their time at Pulse. So that was a decision that we made, and we wanted to, use all that we could as far as, those who provided stories about an individual. So the majority of the ones featured were family members, but we did have a few others that were friends or partners or what have you. So you'll see here, the idea is that each of the exhibits that we had done, the 5 exhibits related to the One Orlando collection, were all bilingual, so they were done in English and Spanish. So typically that would mean that any of the text that we feature on the wall at the exhibit is translated into both English and Spanish. With the Oral History Interactive, it presented a little bit of a different situation because the majority of the interviews were in English, but we do have a selection that were conducted in Spanish. So in order to make it, accessible and interactive for everyone, we made the decision to translate them all and then provide them on the screen in both English and Spanish. So if you're an English speaker and the clip is in Spanish, you would be able to read it. And if you are, if it's vice versa, you can there'd be text so that you'd be able to understand. So in particular, this one here that you see is Luis Condi, and it was an interview with his mother, Maria, and his sister Lynette, and basically just talking about his personality and what they loved about him. And I think that that's something really important, and it's not something that people necessarily lose sight of, but I think it's something that should really be highlighted, that all 49 of these people had their own lives, their own people who loved them, and it's a really important part, and we thought that that was certainly worth highlighting. So I'll play a quick clip of this if we can get it to work here. And this is one of the ones that was done in Spanish.
Yo te puedo decir que era un ser humano extraordinario. Compartía con todo el mundo. Era la persona que verdaderamente tenía una sonrisa tan hermosa que verdaderamente él llamaba la atención en su negocio. Y así mismo era fuera del negocio, o sea, era la misma persona en todos lados. Fue un hijo muy excelente, nunca tuvo coraje, siempre tenía su sonrisa y su buen humor.
¿Tienes algo que añadir?
Sí, ¿quién era mi hermano? Mi hermano era un ser especial, no era porque era mi hermano, pero donde quiera que él llegaba dejaba una huella porque era sincero, cariñoso y te daba esa confianza. Era como a todo el mundo hacías una familia con él, ¿sabes? Él hacía a todo el mundo, él llamaba como familia porque él hacía con todos como una familia, y en su negocio igual. Por eso es que él tenía el negocio tan bonito, porque era su forma de ser tan especial que lo hacía diferente.
So another way that I want to just kind of briefly discuss that these oral histories, both the One Orlando collection and just in general, is that if you are talking to someone like Pam had mentioned about a specific event or a specific story in their life, they often end up talking about a lot of different things that pertain to, history and local history. And it's been a useful tool because from that there have been sort of things that have grown, and our collection has grown because we get these stories from people's lives who were associated with this that maybe are not necessarily directly related to Pulse. So one example that we've talked about quite a bit recently, because it pertains to an exhibit that we're doing this fall, is that for the 4-year exhibit, we interviewed an individual about his time running the nightclub that was in the building that Pulse was prior to it becoming Pulse. And so that was kind of why we initially reached out to him, why we were, kind of able to do that interview. And of course, that was a big topic of discussion, but we also learned a lot about his life in Orlando aside from that, and ended up donating a fairly large collection that will be featured in an exhibit this fall about the independent music culture here in Orlando. So you never know kind of how all this pertains, and I think it speaks to kind of listening to someone's entire story rather than focusing just on this one event, and kind of building them out a little bit more as people and gaining a better understanding of them as individuals. So. Oh. Sorry about that. Okay, so you're back here.
So we've talked a bit about objects, we've talked about exhibitions. We'll move through this part pretty quickly because of time. We want to leave time for questions. But something that's interesting is that every year for the 5 or 6 different exhibitions, we've done something different. We've featured different items. We've done storytelling in different ways. And so we want to just walk through those really quickly in a sentence or two and kind of help explain what was our thesis? How did we come to the decision we chose and what we featured and how we did the exhibition each year? We could do an exhibit every single year, certainly. There are so many stories to tell. One thing to point out, in the first year, we only got to have the exhibition open for a week because it wasn't planned. It was not a planned exhibition. And so it kind of came up, but we had the highest month-long attendance that we'd ever had in that month. In June of 2021 at the 5-year. So it was June of 2017. In June of 2021 at the 5-year Remembrance Exhibition was the next highest attendance we'd had. So that tells you 5 years later, people still really wanted to engage with this material. They still wanted this space for healing. They wanted to come and they wanted to be around these items and these objects. That in 5 years, and we've done some major national award-winning exhibitions in the meantime, but it was the single highest attendance, specifically people coming to this. So this is one picture from each of the exhibitions that we've done. 6 exhibits in total. The first upper left, I'm going to talk about the first 3 briefly, and then Jeremy kind of came on the scene and took on a lot of the curation of these exhibitions and did just a really incredible job. So we'll kind of split the duty here. But the first one that you see was actually when I first came in February 2016, we decided to do an exhibit of LGBTQ history locally. It hadn't been done. When we started to reach into our collection, we realized we didn't have anything in our collection to tell the story. And so we started building from scratch. And then 4 months later, 5 months later, Pulse happened. And it changed things. We obviously could not go forth opening an exhibit in October about queer history locally without including this event. Even though we didn't have all the facts, we didn't know exactly what this event meant just yet. So we added a wall. We changed the entire exhibition to be able to do this. So this was the first actual public exhibition of the items since they, had lived their normal, natural life at the memorials, et cetera. And one thing that has held strong through all the exhibits is that we always feature the 49. And it's always with a photo, never just with a name. We want you to see that these were people. We never put them in alphabetical order. We don't want you to read the first 5 names over and over again. We want you to search for that name you're looking for and see all the others too. So that was our first thing. We featured some different items. That was opened in October of 2016. And then in June of 2017, we opened our first year Remembrance Exhibition. And this was a major production, 3,200 square feet. We usually take 1 to 2 years to design that. We did it in about 3 or 4 months. We installed it in less than a week, and we deinstalled it in less than 3 days to be able to do it. But it featured items such as the IKEA couch that found its way to a memorial. It featured items like a paper heart dress that had been made in honor of Brenda Lee Marquez McCool, whose cross you saw a little earlier, who was a mother of 11 and laid over her son so that he did not perish in this event. She was at the club celebrating him with him, made in her honor because she was also a breast cancer survivor. That first year, we had multiple things. We had items that had these big, deep, beautiful stories that we had learned. And then we wanted to show the magnitude. We don't know anything about the 200 rosaries that found their way to the memorials, but displaying them all in one case just really said something on its own without having words and stories, right? So it was sort of a balance between these sort of micro and macro parts of this story. The next year, the exhibit was a little bit smaller, but again, we had learned in the second year so many new stories. We'd received so many new objects, and there were so many things that we'll never be able to display them all in one place. And so again, it was just sort of looking at different themes, and it was looking at music and the events and the things that had been written and other items that had come up. And we did feature a wall that was called the Sites of Solidarity. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but that was from that second year exhibition. And then moving into the third year, I'll let Jeremy speak to. How are we doing on time? Okay.
So an effort to keep things, sort of focusing on different themes or making it interesting for people who are repeat visitors for the exhibits, for the third year remembrance, we determined that we were going to do an art-themed exhibit. So the idea was to feature artwork created for a number of different reasons. There were pieces of artwork left at the memorials in honor of the victims. There were people who created artwork as a way of raising funds for the various causes associated with the tragedy. And there were just so many examples of people from outside of the local Orlando community who created pieces just because of their sort of emotional response to the event. So it was a way to kind of highlight some of that, and it really does sort of bring into some thought into the idea of what artwork is and the sort of emotional expression that people, the catharsis that people feel by creating it. And we, for me personally, I think it was a way, being that this was the first one that I worked on, it was interesting to see the sort of vast array of the reasons why people created artwork, and also where it all came from. So you see the images there from this particular exhibit in the bottom left corner are from an artist who is based in Michigan. So it sort of is really eye-opening to see like how this event doesn't just affect people here locally or the local community, but kind of goes beyond that. For the next year, we decided to focus on the sort of physical history of a select amount of objects from our collection. So it was, the idea of not just the provenance of the actual object, but also the story of, different examples of, say, the organization or the group that created the object, kind of going back in their history. And the way that it was done was in a timeline format, so that everyone, you could follow from the sort of beginning of the story of that object until present day, having it in our collection and on display, but with all of them having the common connection point of June 12th, 2016, of the Pulse nightclub shooting. And it was interesting because this was our 2020 exhibit, so we had to pivot quite a bit and offer this completely virtually. So the preliminary planning was done to do this in a physical gallery, and the pivot was made to do so online. And I think that was a kind of an interesting experience, and speaks to the sort of way of the world at that time and even till today. But I think that it provided an opportunity for people to visit who wouldn't otherwise have been able to make it here physically. So either because they live geographically very far away, or because they otherwise wouldn't be able to come here, or they just wouldn't feel comfortable kind of seeing that in person, and were able to view it in the privacy of their own home. And then the last photo is from our 5-year remembrance exhibit called Community. And as I said, kind of with the art exhibit, at least for my sort of understanding of everything, and seeing how greatly this affected people from all over the country and all over the world, we decided to follow the story of Pulse from the perspective of a community. So the first section really focused on Pulse prior to the shooting, prior to 2016, and sort of conveying what that community was there, the people who worked there, the people who went there regularly, and sort of that relatively small community of people who Pulse meant something to them here, and sort of follow that as this event happened, and see how much larger that community became. So after the tragedy, or in the immediate times after the tragedy, you're seeing the the growth of the loved ones of the people who were there, the survivors, the first responders, all the the teams from the hospitals, and all the people that were our leadership here locally that were somehow affected and involved, and that became a new community and a slightly larger community. And then of course our local community here, seeing how just those who live in this area and how they were touched by it at the various memorial sites and that kind of thing. And then seeing how people from all over the world responded, and we now have collection items that represent countries all over the world, and people connect to it in so many different ways for so many different reasons, and that the idea of community can mean so many different things, and it's very personal of what it means to you, and how all these people can kind of relate under this one sort of common idea.
I'll just touch base on this briefly because we've got a few sort of new to the collection objects I'd like Jeremy to feature before questions. But I mentioned in our second year exhibit, we had a Site of Solidarity wall. we found so many objects left at the memorials that were from other sites of trauma, be that 9/11, Oklahoma City, Virginia Tech. And it sort of went both ways. We didn't have an item left at the memorial from Virginia Tech, but what Virginia Tech had in their collection, and we'd made a relationship with them, they had a check of money raised from a local UCF student that had sent that check to them to try to provide resources after theirs, which of course was the largest mass shooting by a single gunman with all the descriptors before our event. And so there was all of these like connection points that were really sort of interesting. And now, you know, there were memorials for Pulse left at the Oklahoma City National Memorial site as well. People from Parkland, after their shooting, came back. You'll see in the lower corner, came to the Pulse site. So this sort of creates this really unfortunate community that nobody chose to be a part of, in how these sites go back and forth and work together. And we have worked with essentially almost every site of mass trauma since this event in terms of their museum colleagues. The people, if they're doing any sort of memorializing or collecting and helping sort of pay forward the knowledge we learned so that they're not starting from scratch. But one of the things about that exhibit is that there were more shootings while we were installing this exhibition. And so we sort of took a bit of a quiet moment and we put up this box, and it was 4 blanks. And we said that by the time this exhibition closes, these boxes will be filled with names. And they were. This is an interim photo, but the 3-month run of this exhibition, all 4 of those slots of mass shootings were filled. And so showing that, unfortunately, this wall already wasn't big enough to contain all of our colleagues in this. It will never, it did not stop at this point. And so, we feature the Manchester, Parkland, a lot of the different sites. And a few things have sort of become interesting after. We've had a patch, I want to say badge, and that wasn't right, a patch from Las Vegas, from their first responders there. And it was left at the site long before the mass shooting happened in Las Vegas. But it would be the same patch that those first responders were wearing that night. And so it was left already for us, and we think about that object differently, right? And this is what I was saying before, is that history impacts every day that happens. It changes something about the history that came before us and how we think about that. And so we thought about that patch very differently after that shooting and its connectivity. And there's several examples like that. Just a quick note that, one thing about the different memorials is that there seem like there's so many similarities between these different shootings and trauma points that happened, but there's so many differences in the memorializing. At no other event that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years are you going to see Mickey waving a gay flag saying Orlando Strong. Las Vegas was a country concert, so you see items that are related to that. Parkland was a school, so you see items related to that. So each of these memorials and the objects that are left at them are really unique. But we continue to work with a lot of those sites. And it's just not a thing that museums have done a lot of. We're used to, collecting, somebody's grandma passes away and they bring us a box out of her attic. That's sort of what history used to be. We think about things that are really old, but contemporary and urgent response collecting are very different. And so it's sort of a new era of doing things. And it's something that we learned a lot from Pulse, and we've gone on to collect in a lot of different ways, a lot of different events. But actually actively collecting history as it's happening, instead of going back 50 years later and being like, oh, I wish nobody had thrown that away, and trying to be more thoughtful and intentional. And we don't know. People ask, well, how do you decide what to curate? Well, it's 50% intuition. What has been important in the past? Or, it's 50% the knowledge of what's been important in the past and basing it on that, and it's 50% intuition of it feels important now, so maybe it'll be important later. So I'll let Jeremy talk about it.
So in the 6 years since Pulse, there have been, growth of our collection, of course, with the early collection being a lot from the memorial sites and the different kind of events that popped up immediately following. But we've continued to collect. The collecting is done a little bit differently now in terms of where we get the items from. Sometimes it's people learn about us and our collection and now want to share things. Sometimes people, just weren't ready to do that. Sometimes it's cultivation of relationships, over a period of time that they now feel that the One Orlando collection is the house, where to best house these items. So just a few things, just different examples of how we've collected items. You see a tattoo of an individual, Stephen Roberts, who donated this photo of a memorial tattoo that they had gotten and posed in front of the Pulse nightclub site. You see down at the bottom right there a photo from an individual named Eric Babcock, who was a photographer for Pulse. So that collection, in addition to images from memorial sites, contains photos from the time that the club was open, and that was something that we were kind of lacking in our collection, and we've been able to kind of grow that to be able to tell the story of why it was so important here locally before the shooting. And then up at the top there, you see some pins that were created by an individual from Illinois. His name is Jimmy D'Ambrosia, and he has come each year to the remembrance events and made pins kind of in honor of that, and distributed them. And during an event here, he was kind enough to share that with our collection. So just a lot of different ways. Of course, we have community partners such as the center, who regularly has donated items, and just different things. It depends, and staff that go to events and pick up things and different stuff like that. So it's continuing to grow. We still work on it all the time and are getting donations all the time. And I wanted to kind of highlight a couple of special items that we've received recently. This one we just got within the past few weeks. It is from a group in Puerto Rico called Bordados por la Paz, or Embroidery for Peace. And they are a group who, there are several groups like them, across the world, but they're sort of, the idea behind the Embroidery for Peace is that they seek to remember the dead, make them visible, and to fight violence and crime. This particular group in Puerto Rico, their sort of stated mission for creating the quilts that they create are they're focused on femicides and hate crimes against the LGBTQ community, and they wanted to make something related to the victims of Pulse. So this really great quilt you see has a square for each of the 49 individuals using different materials, different contributors, and as you can see, there's a large list there of people who contributed to this particular item. Bertha Raffo was the person who reached out to us and donated that, and I believe that she is watching in Puerto Rico, so thank you very much for your donation. And it's items like these that we have these, sort of special stories associated with, that these people, took the time to do this, who don't live here locally in Orlando, who were touched by the events, and we very much appreciate getting items like that. This next piece, and I know we're short on time here, but this is from South Korea, and it's sort of an interesting story about how we were able to collect it. So we were put in touch with an individual named Dave Kim, and he is from the Sinanun Center in Seoul, South Korea. And he had met some dignitaries here locally, both from the city of Orlando and from the World Orlando Organization. And we were told by them about this particular piece that he had created in remembrance of Pulse, this artwork. So we were connected with Dave Kim, who was sort of facilitating this for the artist. His name is Jian Nahwan. And so Dave put us in contact with Jian. And I reached out to, so this had been last summer. I reached out to Jian and wasn't able to hear back from him for quite a while. Eventually, he did reply and said that he had been very ill and he apologized, and that he really wanted to make sure that we got the print of this particular piece of artwork, but that he had been hospitalized recently and had not been able to send it. So I continued to try to touch base with him, and unfortunately kind of lost contact with him. So a while later, I reached out, so this would have been in February of this year, I reached back out to Dave, and he informed me very sadly that Jian had passed away from his illness. So his husband, and both Dave and Jian's husband, really wanted us to have this item in our collection. So they sent these posters from South Korea to us, and now we have them. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that because, one, I think it's a really great piece of art, and it's really interesting to see the reach of the story going all the way to South Korea, but also just the sort of stories that are associated with the collecting itself and how this individual who has since passed away, now that's part of his legacy that we know about that we otherwise wouldn't have, and in all the sort of interconnectivity with all of that. And I wanted to also just real quick, something that I thought was very sort of poignant about this is that I was looking through the emails that I had sent with Gian and wanted to share what his email signature said at the time. So this was, during the pandemic and everything. So my assumption in this quote was related to that, but I think it relates to so many different things, both in terms of, tragic events, the state of our world, and not just now, but throughout history. Kind of the way that he would close his emails was, "We're going through a difficult situation in the world, but I hope you are always fine." And I think that's like a really nice sentiment, and it relates to so much of the, the work related that he did to this, and that the people who create artwork is just kind of finding that, humanity and all this, and the community that, has been created through this.
This is a photo of staff after we cleared the Pulse Memorial for one of the iterations of putting up a new memorial fence and making something that was more, beautified and safe for people to go to. And this photo is just really to illustrate that it took many people in building this collection. The story that Jeremy just shared of how many, it was somebody going to like a national conference from the city, and the city talking to somebody else, and then them talking to us, and then all of these people have been touched by this, and so many people have been involved in building this collection. And so, we just want to say a broad thank you to everybody who's been a part of it, and a very, very deep thank you to the families, the survivors, the first responders, anybody who shared their story with us, because that's them giving a piece of themselves to us to preserve for history so that people can continue into perpetuity to try to understand this event, and if not understand it, hopefully learn from it. So we'll open the floor if anybody has any questions about objects, the exhibits, the collecting, anything.
Actually, you probably said this, but where is the quilt? I'm sorry, I forgot her name.
Roberta?
Yes, where is it?
So the quilt from Roberta Blick is currently preserved in our collection. So it was donated to us, and so we have it. We don't have everything on display all the time. We have 14,000 years of history that we do here, but we preserve it, and it can be brought back out for research. It can be brought back out for exhibition. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but we did, normally when something comes to a museum, we don't let it back out. We did take the quill out and take it to her funeral so that it could be displayed. So that was something that was unique. But we have it, and it's safely preserved in acid-free materials to make sure that it lasts for not 10 years, but hundreds of years. So.
You got a question from the chat.
Okay.
Someone was wondering what is happening with the actual Pulse building itself, if anything's being done to preserve that, if you know.
Yeah, so that would be something to follow up with the One Pulse Foundation. There was a foundation created the January after Pulse happened to look at how this event's memorialized, what happens with the property, et cetera. So they have a website, and I'd recommend going to that or contacting them to see where they're at in the process and what's going on with that. Certainly, we. For the time being, it's part of our mission to preserve local history, and so we continue to collect around Pulse, and we'll see what happens with them in the future. But for now, we're just really focused on preserving those stories. So, yes.
Can you give us an idea of how big the collection is, how much space it takes up, or how many things are in it?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so
Repeat the question.
sure, yeah. So the question was how, like, the footprint of the actual collection and the number of items in it. Is that correct? So we have, we're constantly growing in sort of the process of cataloging and all those kind of things. We are probably over 14,000 or more items, both digital and physical, with the sort of growing end of that being the more digital. So I would say we have between 6,000 and 7,000 physical objects, and then we're growing that, but the digital end, when we get donations of 1,000 photos at a time or something like that, so that number continues to grow. So in terms of the actual footprint of it, we have a dedicated space for that at our storage facility. So it represents a portion of several rows. We keep it all together. So sort of like how I mentioned about the crosses, we actually do keep all of the pulse-related items in the same area so that we're able to kind of quickly get those and, for either, research purposes or whatever the case may be for exhibition. So yeah, I mean, it's a fairly large footprint. I would say, for those of you in the room, probably a little larger than this room on shelving.
It's packed tight.
Yeah. So, and I just mean as far as and then we have, several layers of shelving and everything like that. So it's a fairly large physical, collection, and it does represent a good, chunk of our off-site storage facility. So yeah, it's pretty large amount.
Yeah, I would add those, the white memorial crosses. They're about this big. So 49 of them in a space takes up a lot if you've seen us present those. But some of the items that we have are huge. Some of those items, if you went to the memorials, it's like a 10 or 12 foot wooden heart that had flowers on it, and then people signed. So we have some really large items, and we have teeny tiny items, and we're pretty effective at storage. We can fit a lot in boxes safely. So it's sometimes hard to qualify and quantify, because 1,000 photographs is different than 1,000 physical artifacts to store as well. So, but it's a big collection, and it's still growing. So.
So I'm new to the area, and I just want to thank you for your presentation. I mean, the work that you guys have done is just so impressive and stunning. And I'm excited to learn more. I have a million questions, but really just what's next, I guess. What's coming in terms of future exhibits or presentations, but more so like the material culture stuff. Like, is anything in the works?
Specifically related to Pulse?
Yeah, specifically.
Yeah, so being new, so there is a group I had mentioned earlier, the One Pulse Foundation. They are working towards creating a memorial, a potential museum, etc. So we're kind of waiting to see what they're doing. In the meantime, like I said, we continue to collect. It happens in different ways. It's not as often or as aggressive as it once was, but we still, every week, few weeks, we're still doing something Pulse related all of the time, every single week. And so we decided not to do an exhibition this year. Depending on what is happening in the community with the foundation, et cetera, other things, we would probably plan to do a 10-year. It becomes sort of a different remembrance mark. The 5-year was really hard for people in a different way than the 4-year and the 3-year, and the 10-year will be different than 15 and 20 years. So we'll look at doing an exhibition potentially at that point if there's not another institution to do that, and we'll keep listening and hearing the stories. And it is one of our most requested for research. People asking for writing thesis or writing books, doing just different research projects on a variety of topics, and so we always make it accessible that way. So time will tell. Different things come up all the time for how the collection can be accessed and used, and we just keep keeping the memory.
Yeah, it's a really nice job of storytelling.
We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Any more online, Katie?
Someone wanted to know if you both had a really memorable moment in sort of curating this collection, and if there's anything additional you wanted to share regarding that.
Yeah, there have been so many. It's very. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not close enough to the mic. Yeah, that's. So yeah, there have been so many different things. It's been such a fulfilling experience working with the collection. Unfortunately, there's a lot of sad stories associated with it, and sort of seeing this grieving play out in a lot of ways. But one way that I think it's been really meaningful to get to meet and speak with the family members of people, of the victims. But one story that I think, and I've probably told this before, but I just wanted to one thing that particularly struck out to me as being meaningful was that very early on in working here, I spoke with someone who was interested in donating some photos, and she had reiterated how glad she was that the One Orlando collection existed, because she had a brother who was affected by this. And I don't know the specifics of the story. I don't know if it was a survivor or just someone who was really touched by the story, but that when all the memorial sites were up, that her brother just wasn't up to going to see these things for whatever reason. And I think that's something that we've heard quite a bit, is that people who are, most immediately affected by this, they're not necessarily, ready or able to go to a vigil or to a site where people are leaving memorial objects. But she wanted to let us know that she appreciated that the One Orlando Collection was saving these things because now he was ready to see it. And it's, we think of saving it for posterity for the future, and that's a very important part of it, but also for those who were here who didn't get to experience it either, for a variety of reasons. And because this is such a sensitive topic, that when people are ready for it, that's why we have it, and we're hopefully be able to share that with people for many years to come. So I just thought that was like sort of a poignant thing to understand, that it's not just a long term, it's that people who were mostly affected by it, have an opportunity, be it a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So I think that's an important element of this as well. I don't know if you have an additional.
How long is this presentation supposed to be? I've been on the project since the morning it happened, and I would say that there are so many things that stick in my mind, and they come up at all different times. But the thing for me, if I could try to find a silver lining, is all of these amazing and incredible and beautiful people I've met that I should have never had the opportunity to. Anything else? All right, well, we will finish the presentation there. Thank you, everybody online and in the room, for joining us. We'll be happy to stick around if anybody does have additional questions. But thank you again so much for coming, and we are very honored to be able to do this for our community, and it's something that we take with the deepest love and respect that we can. And so are always open to thoughts and ideas. If you ever have more questions or something that you think we could do or something that we've missed, we'd be happy to hear about it. But pay attention to our events page, our social media. We do a lot of really great content. And again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.